Welcome to Polymathis. There's been a question on mind since the beginning of this pandemic. Should workers be given hazard pay during this ecological crisis? The coronavirus is no laughing matter. It might not have been taken seriously by us a few weeks ago when it was far away in China, but now that it has come to our own communities, it is the only thing on our minds. The rapidity with which it spreads is unlike anything we've seen before. The long incubation period means that it is guaranteed to be spread by someone before they are aware they even have it. And the death rates across the board for every age group are 10 times as high as the typical flu we deal with every year. This has caused many workers to be sent home, as local governments try to contain the spread of the virus before it overwhelms the system. But for many of us, we are expected to keep working. People that work in healthcare, logistics, food distribution, and industries related to the supply chain have been labeled essential workers. This term simply means that if we stop working, society as we know it will break down into anarchy and cause far more problems than the ones caused by the virus itself. Not only that, but us essential employees are also needed to support the efforts of the medical industry that is fighting this virus. But if we are so essential to the economy and to the nationwide battle with the pandemic, why aren't we being compensated for it? Many essential workers are working class or straight up poor, earning wages barely above the poverty line. The pay we receive does not equate to the word essential in any manner. Before this, we were regarded as unskilled labor, and suddenly we are being called essential. I've seen firsthand companies tell employees that they are on the front lines in the fight against this virus. And they have basically said that there's no timeline where their industries will be shutting down. They don't even have plans in place for if someone contracts the virus at their facilities. They will wipe the place down and come back the next day. Work will continue as long as it is needed. There are few protocols being taken to prevent outbreaks in their facilities, except for some Lysol wipes and separating shifts. There's no protocol or mandate for wearing protective masks. So the question is, are essential workers at least going to be given hazard pay for going to work during a pandemic, when a large percentage of the workforce is either working from home or not working at all? You might scoff at this idea because you think this virus is not in fact that hazardous for young people in their prime who are typically in these positions. After all, that is what we have been told. Young people should have little to fear from this pandemic. It is only a concern of the old and people with pre-existing health conditions. So I did a little research and some math. Looking up the most dangerous jobs in America, you will find that logging and fishing are the most hazardous jobs out there. Fishing had 99.8 fatalities per 100,000 members of the workforce in 2019. Logging had 84.3 fatalities per 100,000 members of the workforce. This amounts to slightly below a 0.1% rate of death if you work in these industries. And no other industry even comes close. The US Army has lower death rates per capita, even when including suicides. Examining the survival rates of COVID-19 in contrast to these figures paint a new picture. For working age people below the age of 50, the rate of death after contracting coronavirus is roughly 0.2%, which translates to 200 in 100,000 working age people dying from this disease, or 1 in 500. COVID-19 is more than twice as deadly as the two most dangerous occupations in this country. More dangerous than being an active member of the military, twice as dangerous as being a roofer or airline pilot, 3 times as dangerous as being a steel worker, and 4 times more dangerous than being a miner, farmer, or a truck driver. To put it simply, going to work during this pandemic involves as much hazard or more than any industry you probably avoided entering because you did not want to die on the job, when the whole point of going to work is your own survival. So I ask once again, should workers during this pandemic be given hazard pay? Do they really mean that we are essential, or does essential just mean expendable? Fodder thrown to fight this pandemic, and if we die, so be it, we were low skilled anyways. Some other cog will take our place in the great machine. There's no doubt in my mind that people who are really on the front line, such as nurses and doctors, should be given at least double their typical pay. They are right in the midst of all this. risking contraction and death every day they go to work. They have a direct and immediate line to getting this virus. It's almost guaranteed for them. And the logistical support workers who keep this country running during good times and bad should be given at least overtime rates during all hours of work. That is not too much to ask during this time. And those who get to stay home and sheltered in place, nice and safe, can rest easy knowing there are other people out there keeping the lights on for them while they watch Netflix and cash their unemployment checks. It would seem a fair trade. There's been some signs of this as companies struggle to retain workers during all this fear. And large corporations such as Amazon are offering double time pay during overtime. But mid-sized and small companies will give you the line that there is no risk for people in your age group. They will laugh it off and say you are overreacting, while governments around the world scramble to contain this thing as if it's an epoch-ending plague. Worst of all, with unemployment rates about to rise from 4% to upwards of 10% or even as high as 30% by some estimates, the working class will lose all its leverage. A labor glut is going to depress wages even further than they've been over the past decade, worse than the Great Recession ever did. Income inequality will rise even higher, as the Federal Reserve bails out failing companies who are asking for governmental support 3 years after they got a $7 trillion tax cut. All those trillions were spent on stock buybacks when stocks were at massively inflated prices. Much worse, companies took out additional debt to make even more stock buybacks to further inflate their stock prices. All that money is now down the drain as the stock market has all but collapsed. But the Federal Reserve and the US government will bail them out of these stupid loans and over-leveraged balance sheets. These companies could have kept that money for an emergency fund. That is what is expected of the average person in this country. You would never expect the government to bail you out of your mortgage, student loans, or credit card debt. The free market is looking more and more like a myth in this country. At this point, we are no different than China, giving money to zombie corporations to prop them up so the appearance of our economy remains strong. All those worthless, speculative industries, which have no real value, will be able to keep bleeding money, and their executives will continue to cash massive checks and golden parachute severance packages. We will print trillions of dollars to blow this bubble back up. And the working and middle class's buying power will be eroded by more and more inflation. If we're lucky, they'll bribe us with a $1,000 check in the mail just so we shut up and keep going to work. But we'll end up paying it all back eventually, because the national debt is our responsibility to pay, not theirs. And that $25 trillion liability is not going anywhere anytime soon. We will be paying it down through austerity or inflation and money printing for the next 100 years. You have to wonder how long this can go on. In a free market, those companies which have failed to plan for something this obvious would go under, and the essential workers keeping this economy running would be properly compensated for their work. What both sides of the political spectrum can agree upon is that this Ponzi scheme monetary system, which rewards failure if you're rich and punishes you for the failure of these massive companies if you're poor or middle class, is getting out of control. And there's nothing we can do to reel it back in. The Federal Reserve has privatized corporate profits and socialized corporate losses since 1913. It is high time that bailouts come from the ground up, not the top down. Otherwise, the dissatisfaction with the establishment in this country is only going to grow in scale, and that will lead to nothing good for them or us.